Is Trump going to guarantee Ukraine's security after a deal with Russia is reached by putting U.S. troops into Ukraine? This is the single biggest question that came out of today's meeting at the White House. President Trump has said, quote, he's going to give a lot of help to Ukraine when he had this meeting with Zelensky. A very different tone from the president as he sat down this time with Zelensky than last time. 6 months ago, these two had a meeting. And I think what it shows is, one, how much President Trump is dedicated to the idea of getting a deal done. I mean, this is an absolute focus of his administration. He could not have more input and more drive into this process. And beyond that, he's willing to take some pretty severe or serious steps, depending on who you ask. We don't know if it means there'll be troops, U.S. troops, as part of this guarantee. Here's the problem, though. If this guarantee is going to be worthy of the name, it can't just be economic. If Russia and Ukraine put down their weapons, divvy up the land, and then there's an agreed upon DMZ, if you will, something like a demilitarized zone, some kind of a buffer zone between the countries, which won't be very substantial, but it'll be very heavily armed and mined and built up. If that's where this is all heading, there has to be a reasonable belief on the side of the Ukrainians that Russia is not just going to rearm, re-equip, and then just punch through again in a few years, probably when you don't have Donald Trump as president in this country, waiting for some wimpy Democrat administration to come along who won't do anything. But the possibility even of U.S. troops as part of the guarantee has a lot of people in MAGA asking questions, because certainly at this stage of the game, we've all seen there are a lot of people who are really pro-Trump and want the Ukraine war to end, but their single guiding, their single issue vote, if you will, on this, their guiding principle on this is no U.S. troops involved. This is not our fight. Now, we wouldn't be getting into the fight in the short term, but if we're going to put ourselves in a place where the United States, let's say, has a military base in Ukraine, that would be the most straightforward way of doing this. It would be something like what we have in South Korea and what we have in Germany. Now, a lot of MAGA is going to say, absolutely not. This is what we don't want. Perhaps it doesn't go to this. I'm just working through what the possibilities are, what a security guarantee could really look like. Because the Ukrainians are smart enough to know that a security, quote, guarantee that only involves sanctions is not worth the paper it's printed on. I mean, the Russians, we can't hit them hard enough economically to get them to stop doing this. We can't get Putin to turn the tanks around because the ruble is getting hit too hard. It's just not. It hasn't happened in years. It's not going to happen. Not while they're a fossil fuel superpower, which unfortunately, because of their natural resources, they still are. Oil and gas, they got a lot of it. A lot of fertilizer, too. So that means that we have to see this through beyond just the economic implications. And this is where Trump is saying there's going to be a lot of help. Now, there's the U.S. basing rights, or a basing situation in Ukraine. That's one way this could go. We could have something like U.S. promises of military support, direct military intervention if Russia invades. But now, either one of these situations, that would seem to be a little bit of a lesser one. The Ukrainians wouldn't want that. I'm sure they want a U.S. base there, although there's some sovereignty issues for them, too, with that. But I think they would want it nonetheless. But the issue then becomes, is this just a backdoor Article 5 NATO situation? Does this then just turn into the perhaps biggest red line that Putin has in all of this is Ukraine cannot be a staging ground? This is in his thinking. I know people say, oh, that's a Russian talking point. Yeah, well, this is what he says, and I think we can all agree this is what he thinks, or at least he says out loud. if it's going to be any attack on Ukraine is triggering a U.S. military, a direct military response, like our planes in the sky, our troops on the ground, even if it's solely defensive in nature, meaning we're not going to go into Russian territory, but we're going to try to support Ukraine, that looks like Article 5 NATO, doesn't it? So how could Putin sign off on his side of the deal if he is giving away what would be the biggest stumbling block, I would assume, for the Russians in this whole thing, which is, no, you can't have a forward operating base of NATO, a de facto forward operating base of NATO in Ukraine, which is, he says, the whole reason for this war. I think the real reason for this war is a resource grab. It is Russian expansionism, irredentism, Russian imperialism. Yes, all of that, but certainly the ostensible reason, or the you could say the fig leaf, the pretextual reason, is to prevent the encroachment of NATO right onto Russia's borders with Ukraine, and that's where this thing gets really, really messy. We'll come back to it. You know, our sponsor is Birch Gold, and Birch Gold is a fantastic company that can help you get actual physical gold, which I've been buying for years. In fact, I buy my gold from Birch Gold, and Birch Gold makes owning physical gold very easy. You're like, why should I buy gold? Look at gold over the past year, 40% increase. Gold over the past 10 years, look at what it's been doing. Just look at the trend. The trend is your friend, right? Look at the trend with gold. Gold keeps increasing in value because fiat currencies keep being printed, not just here in America, but all over the world. That's why a lot of national banks and sovereign wealth funds are buying up gold at record prices. Birch Gold Group makes owning physical gold very easy. They can also convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Check out Birch Gold Group today. Text Buck to 989898. Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. Text Buck to 989898. Tens of thousands of happy customers with Birch Gold. Check them out today. Okay, so U.S. security guarantee for Russia, or for Ukraine rather, against Russian aggression. This is all feeling a lot like it is tied into, at least analogous to what we've seen in World War I with the style of warfare. It is largely trench warfare with drones. That's the best way to describe what the front in Ukraine is, based on all the reports you can read. And it's pretty stunning how deep the fortifications, the ground fortifications are. They've referred to it, well, they want to avoid calling it a Maginot Line for Ukraine because of what happened to the French Maginot Line, but that is probably the closest historical analogy. And when you see what the plan is here, it's going to be to make it impossible for Russia to advance further in its territorial ambitions and to strengthen the defensive perimeter of Ukraine. But there's no future in which anyone sees Ukraine punching across that no man's land, if you will, and taking the fight to the Russians in territory they currently truly control and expelling them all from Ukraine. So that means you're going to have territorial concessions. That part of it, I think, is unavoidable. And that part of it is, I think, where you're going to see a lot of pushback from our press, because they're going to say, Trump, if we do get to a deal, first of all, no matter what the deal is, there are going to be the Trump haters out there who say the deal is not good enough. He pushed them into this. He sold out Ukraine. Because the one thing they cannot accept, they will not accept, is that Trump has done anything good here. That Trump has done something perhaps even worthy of a Nobel Prize. If we get there. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, it's a best effort. But we have to be very honest about what the implications are here if he gets this through. And it will be the most impressive win on the world stage by a president, I really think, since Reagan and the fall of the Berlin Wall. I don't know what else could be equivalent to this, because Trump will have brought together this negotiation and ended a massive conflict between advanced militaries, advanced economies. This isn't, some third world counterinsurgency campaign somewhere. This is Russia with a lot of nukes. This is a big deal. And Trump is doing everything he can to bring this thing to a conclusion. It's so bloody, and it's such a horrific loss of life on both sides. So on a humanitarian front, you would just want this to end as quickly as possible because of the horrendous casualties that are mounting, and a generation of Russians, a generation of Ukrainians lost. And I understand we're to think that the Russians are the bad guys, and certainly Putin is the aggressor here. I'm very clear on that. I understand, and we've been able to see this all along. And Putin's not a good person. He's not an ethical person in the way we think of ethics. But a lot of these Russian conscripts, they just think they're fighting for their country. They're fighting because they have no choice. They don't want to go to prison, or they don't want to be beaten by the FSB and conscripted anyway. So they're in a tough situation. The average Russian who's being thrown onto the front lines here doesn't really have a choice. And a lot of Ukrainians are also in that situation where they don't have much of a choice, if at all. And I know there's been very aggressive conscription on the Ukrainian side of things, too. So I feel bad. These are human beings. These are human beings who are living in trenches, who are hoping that they don't have a drone flown right at them that explodes right next to them. And if it doesn't just kill them outright, horrifically maims them, takes their arm, maybe half their face. I mean, it's awful, awful stuff that's going on here. And it's so we can know who's in charge of pieces of territory that most Americans honestly still, and this isn't a knock on Americans who can't, but most Americans still can't find this stuff on a map. And why should they? It's very far away. It's not, it's not their thing. It's not our problem. This isn't a territorial dispute between Mexico and Arizona. This isn't really our problem in that sense. But because we're America, I guess anything becomes our problem if it's big enough anywhere in the world. And this is certainly big enough. So I'm very hopeful that Trump will be able to move this to a better place and get the bloodshed to stop. And it will be remarkable if that is in fact the case. We're also seeing here a preview, I think, of what warfare in the future is going to look like, particularly with the drones, but also increasingly with a combination of technology and manufacturing. It's not just going to be who has the most advanced stuff. It's going to be who can make this stuff at scale, that and a whole bunch of different things, different kinds of drone, different kinds of munitions. So the industrial backbone, the U.S., once it got going in World War II, U.S. industrial and economic might was just so incredible that we were able to eventually just steamroll the bad guys, particularly in the Pacific theater. We just could make more planes, better planes, more. We had more and better everything, and it was our brave men on the front lines, but it was also the machinery back home that was making all this stuff. And that's what warfare in the future is going to look like. We're going to get away from the continued third world counterinsurgency operations of the anti-jihadist GWAT campaigns and move toward what kind of drones can you fly that can take out a tank? What kind of drones do you have, or missiles do you have that can take out major naval surface ships? I mean, these are the calculations going forward. I think they're going to be dominating warfare and our focus of it. So there's a lot that's being learned, because there's no laboratory of warfare quite like a war, as all history shows us. There's a lot that's being learned on the front lines in Ukraine that will be applicable for our own defense, as well as other countries, other allies of ours' defense going forward. I'm thinking about Taiwan and China, obviously, in a big way. The Taiwanese, I'm sure, have a lot that they are learning from being able to stop a power that is superior in materiel and manpower overall, but with the right technology and the right interlocking fields of fire, if you will, from the whether it's anti-aircraft, anti-personnel, trenches, all these things brought together, a much smaller but technologically advanced power can be formidable on the defensive. So that may be very good news for Taiwan, but it's something that we're seeing play out now. Our sponsor here is Paradigm Press. Our federal government has some funding problems, and one of them being our Social Security system. Most of us don't get to see the spending mistakes and fraud that goes on with Social Security, but there's so much of it, and it's just making our funding problems worse. But as a country, there's a solution to our overall funding problem. Jim Rickards, a 50-year government insider, and he thinks that there's a solution here, and President Trump is on the verge of the breakthrough. He says America's anything but broke, and investors who understand why could make a fortune. Jim Rickards believes if you're over 50, this is your last chance to create lasting wealth, regardless of your politics. For the full story, go visit this website, birthright2025.com. That's birthright2025.com. Hear what Jim Rickards has to say about this opportunity, paid for by Paradigm Press. That's the show today, friends. Shields high.